Welcome this afternoon of May 3rd, 2018, to the regular meeting of the Enterprise Committee. With me on the dais are Council Members Goodman, Fletcher, and Councilmember Reich. We constitute a quorum and are charged with this committee's business. First, before you, we have 3 consent items. They're just from our IT department, and then we will have our monthly city coordinators update. Those 3 items, the first is a contract with governmentjobs.com for applicant tracking software for HR. The second item on consent is a contract with Ginfonnet software for customer letters and crew work orders for our solid waste and recycling department. The third is dynamic imaging systems for photo imaging equipment for our police department. Any questions or anything needing to be taken off? All those in approval, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Our discussion item today is something we'll get into a more regular habit of doing, and that's similar to our Intergovernmental Relations Committee. We'll have our city coordinator, Nuria Rivera Vandermeide, come and give us an update of what's going on in the coordinator's office. And she's here to do that today, and then we'll end with an overview of the 2018 strategic planning work that Andrea Larson has been going on. So welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair Palmisano. Again, my name is Nuria Rivera Vandermeide, and I'm the city coordinator. It's very loud. I wanted to give you a quick little update. It always feels like there is so much going on at one time in the city coordinator's office, so I will give you kind of a brief overview of what's cropping up lately and perhaps some insight into some additional either deeper dives or spotlight presentations or things that are coming before you in the near future as well. So we're going to touch a little bit later on our strategic planning and study sessions, but note that the next study session is on economic development. That is scheduled for May 10th. We had a really robust discussion and appreciate council members' participation in the housing one last week. And we're also working on the transportation and infrastructure. And then Andrea Larson in our office will be able to give you a little update on strategic planning coming up after this. Wanted to give you a little update on minimum wage study. We continue to be working with our partners at DEED, at the Department of Health and Human Services, and with our revenue partners, in addition to the Federal Reserve. And we hope to have a baseline report finalized by late summer and coming to council for a presentation either in August or September of this year yet for the baseline report. We're also working on, Jeff Schneider in our office is working to increase the coordination between the university. Seems like the university is an untapped resource. We either as departments generally across the enterprise know how to access them or not. And so we're working on a master contract where we can make that available to all departments to really see where you need your research needs, what synergies you can find in, for example, we had a great presentation today by the Carlson Management School, and figuring out what that looks like moving forward. So that will also come at some point forward to this committee for approval, but that is in the works. Jenny Chaiboot in our office is working with the Transgender Equity Council. She continues to really excellently staff a newly created advisory board. And so she is planning to come before the Peace Committee with that council in June. So there will be more on that as we move forward. Our small business team continues to really be working a lot in community. We had the privilege of working with Councilmember Fletcher's office and doing a debrief on the Super Bowl I believe it was last month. My days are melding, my weeks are melding, but it was last month. And one of the things that came out of it was a recommendation for our office to think about an internal working group to see how we can better align those gaps between small businesses and when we have these larger events. It's appropriate as we're thinking about Final Four preparations. That is another item that, by the way, will be coming to you a little bit more in June and July as we think about how those preparations are going forward. So just stay tuned for that. But we will be getting this, we are scheduling, and I know staff is scheduling this work group to move forward, and we have apprised your office of that as we go. So thank you for that. That small business team really continues to think about themselves more in community than in City Hall, and I really appreciate that aspect of their work. They hold weekly community office hours in libraries across the city. They have 3 coming up for this May 8th, May 16th, and May 24th. There's a newsletter that we do internally. I'm about to send that to each and every one of council members' offices, so you know what that's happened. But that collaboration and their work could not happen were it not for the collaboration of our partners in CPED, health, police, civil rights with the workplace regulations and so forth. So they continue to move that forward. They're also really excitedly, I've asked them to look at a youth entrepreneurship brochure, one really aimed at how do we do that. There are a lot of partners in the city that are doing some youth mentorships and entrepreneurship opportunities. And so we're thinking about creating a brochure just to highlight that and be able to market that to our youth that are thinking about becoming small businesses themselves. You've already heard a little update on arts and the creative economy, but just so you know that the Creative City Index is almost complete. The full report is scheduled for June release, so we'll be hearing a little bit more about that. We have contracted with an individual who really has some expertise in events and particularly those related to the arts. And so we are thinking about the American for the Arts Conference in 2019. And so hopefully as we continue to get some information about what that means for the city in terms of sponsorship and if that requires any resources, we will come to you. But that's an exciting piece of work in partnership with Springboard for the Arts. And then the Creative City Challenge artists were selected. I know you've heard Carry On Homes. We are in preparation for what that festival starts to look like in that kickoff in the Commons later on this summer. You heard a tremendously robust and wonderful presentation by our Division of Race and Equity, and Joy Marsh-Stevens and Laurice happen to be in the room, so I can say that compliment publicly. But they've been doing a lot of great work as that moves forward. I won't go into some of that update because you heard a lot of their work, but only mention that you'll hear part of their work as part of the strategic planning conversation as well in the next presentation. They're really truly focused on racial equity community advisory committee and steering committee sort of training and onboarding as that moves forward. We have the Recast Mural project that hopefully will be put forward right in front of council offices across the hallway later this month. We're hoping for that installation and working on dates, but we've gotten that approval from MBC. They're working on a youth participatory action resource project that is really youth-led on input and looking at trauma, and that's both in North-South Minneapolis. And they continue to work on an oral history project with MPD and North Point, and you'll be hearing about that more in the future at a future presentation. The Trauma Zone has a variety of things that are going on in their neck of the wood, but primarily they are really focused on economic development. They continue to work as part of their economic development work group, focused on bringing additional resources, particularly with small businesses on the north side. And they have been working in partnership with Cura on capital investment study aimed at determining the value of investments in North Minneapolis. And again, we're trying to schedule when they come forward. I think Andrea Larson in our shop has been trying to schedule those, and you'll be hearing about that sometime this summer. We've also put in, just recently, I've signed in a grant request to the federal government for a farmers market promotion program in partnership with Appetite for Change, and that's all intended to be within the Promise Zone. Sustainability is not something that usually comes before this committee, as that reports specifically to Peace, but I'll just highlight that, as many of you know, because they've just collaborated with policymakers on the 100% renewable electricity resolution, and that's exciting work as that moves forward. They presented at Peace their 2018 energy programming for the franchise fee increase that was approved in the last budget. They are planning a study session involving inclusive financing, which is specific to pursuing financing solutions to eliminate barriers that keep residents from participating in the clean energy economy. And I believe that's scheduled for May 21st. I know they were working those dates out with the clerk. So that's moving forward. And then I wanted to just mention and highlight Homegrown Minneapolis has a food policy forum on May 23rd at Davis Center. It is a public event, but it's really a conversation with the new food council to identify and activate policy priorities for this 2018-2019 cohort. We have a few new hires in the loop, so just sort of alerting folks to that as we move forward. We were lucky to receive a grant for a human trafficking fellow. This grant will continue some of the great work that's been happening with the county and with our own city attorney's office and sex trafficking work group that's been formed here in the city. We're going to continue to do that and particularly focus on our LGBTQ community, but we're also going to be thinking about how do we expand that into labor trafficking, and that's a really exciting portion of this grant. We have been interviewing folks for that cohort, and we're hopefully coming to a decision on that moving forward, and the funder's excited to pair our person with a partner in Chicago and in Georgia, so they will be a cohort of people moving that forward. Our sustainability manager position, we posted that, as many of you know. That position has been vacant for a while. We opened that position. I just received yesterday morning a list of everyone who meet minimum quals, and so we're about to get a panel together to think about what that looks like and move forward on that position, which will be great. We are hoping to open the CRO position soon, the Chief Resiliency Officer. We have been thinking and working with our Rockefeller funder on what does that look like moving forward in terms of what those deliverables are. We are pleased to say we've got a good relationship with our funder, and they have agreed to allow us to repost or re-nominate someone in that position and to start that program from scratch. 2 years full funding. So we're excited to think about what that looks like, and so we'll let you know when that happens. You'll know when that posts. And hopefully soon here, I will be coming to you to think about a replacement for myself in my former job. I've talked about it pretty openly, but my span of control as deputy was already large. My plan is to think about 2 people, 2 directors, instead of a deputy, and so we are working with HR to do that. We will come to council for approval of those appointed positions, and then hopefully we will move forward. So that's a quick high-level update of all that's going on, or at least most of what's going on in our world. And for a deeper dive or a spotlight, I want to pass the baton, unless there are questions, to Andrea Larson to give us a presentation of what we're doing for strategic planning.
Thank you very much, Coordinator. Does anyone have questions or thoughts about some of these updates from the Coordinator's Department today? Nope, then let's continue. We have Ms. Larson here to talk about some of the strategic planning. She's gotten to some council members and been able to have conversations with them about how our strategic planning process is lining up with a number of other processes, but not everybody. So I don't know who on the dais here this might be new to, but we'll see as you go along some of the work that you've been working to try to align a lot of timelines here. So thanks for being here.
Great. Yeah, happy to be here. I'm Andrea Larson. I'm the manager of strategic planning and analysis in the coordinator's office. I'm here to talk about 2018 strategic planning. So with the start of a new term, we have an opportunity this year to rethink strategic planning in partnership with Joy Stevens, who leads Race and Equity, Heather Worthington, who leads Long Range Planning, Micah Intermill, who leads the Budget Office, as well as Ron Harris in Council President Bender's office. We've developed an idea for a new way to do strategic planning. So I'll go through why we think we need to make this change, what the proposed model is, and then some next steps. In the last several council cycles, the city has used a structure which included setting 5 visionary goals, like Living Well and One Minneapolis, with 5 to 6 associated strategic directions per goal. As the city tried to use these goals to align work through business planning, to report progress through results, and to allocate resources through the budget process, it became clear that the goals and strategic directions were more values than tangible and measurable goals. Setting these values was an important step in establishing the vision for the city, but using these in our work posed some challenges. So as values, the goals were high level, which made everything our priority. This made decisions about what to do and where to put resources difficult. Measuring values can be hard. How do we know who's living well or if we are a great place, and how do we measure our progress towards those? And it created challenges for flowing to the work of the city and departments, which made accountability and transparency and buy-in difficult. The model we're proposing addresses the challenges by integrating 4 major enterprise-wide plans: the strategic plan, the comprehensive plan, racial equity plan, and the budget. We're conveniently and uniquely at a time when these planning processes are happening at the same time. The status quo would be to have 4 distinct plans, but to integrate all of these plans is new and is what we're proposing to do. We think that doing this will address the challenges of the previous process. So I'll give you a couple examples. When we look at other cities and their equity and strategic planning, there's a sort of a spectrum of integration where we see that cities either have a strategic plan and a racial equity plan separately, a strategic plan with equity statements where they will do some, say, it will sort of look like we will accomplish X, Y, Z, and we will make it equal. But what we're hoping to do is create one plan which incorporates racial equity in how we do our strategic planning, in the goals that we set, and how we measure our work. Likewise, we have an opportunity with the comprehensive plan to leverage the work that's already happened and decide what of that 10-year plan do we want to try to bite off and chew in the next 4 years. And then consider through the budget how we are going to use our biggest strategic lever, our budget, to accomplish this work. So we have some more details of the model that Joy is going to walk through.
Good afternoon. So the proposed model that you're looking at shows the different phases of the strategic planning process that we proposed. There are 3 different phases and then an evaluation phase at the end of it. The far right, what you're looking at is a set of the stakeholders who we anticipate will be participating in each of these different phases of the work. At the highest level, we're looking at really the visioning phase, which is a traditional role that council has played in the past with the mayor's office, and really looking at what is setting the vision, what are our overall values that are driving the work of our city. That really does define what's happening in that first tier. It's setting that vision statement and then beginning to look at our comprehensive plan and the 97 strategic policy areas and really making some decisions for the next 4 years of our work to say, where will we focus? Where are the strategic areas within those 97 that we will focus on in the next 4 years, and then beginning to set those success factors associated with those areas. So as Andrea mentioned, historically, we would have the value statements or the goals set at the highest level of the organization, but we wouldn't have the ways to measure that. In this specific rollout, as we proposed, we would both have the vision, have those policy areas identified, and then the success factors associated with that. We're anticipating at that level, we certainly have our elected policymakers who are participating and really driving that work in relationship with some key department staff. So certainly our city coordinator, likely the clerk's office, and others who are deemed to be relevant to that conversation. In the middle tier is the opportunity for us to engage a different set of stakeholders. So adding to our elected policymakers and the department leadership that's been participating already, this is our opportunity to expand the table of who's there speaking into the process, really looking at that community voice that comes in. One of the reasons why we've called out community voice in the form of our boards and commissions is because the resolution that formed the Race Equity Community Advisory Committee states specifically that that group has a role to play in racial equity planning. Since we are coordinating racial equity planning and the strategic planning process, we saw this as an opportunity certainly to include that committee, but also other committees who would have a part to play, perhaps CLIC or the Planning Commission, others who we determine along the way would really have a strong voice in helping us think strategically about the next 4 years of our work. In that tier, the individuals participating will take those prioritized strategic policy areas and the success factors, look within them to say, what are the action steps as called out in the comprehensive plan that we also want to focus on related to those strategic policy areas. Excuse me. And then in addition to that, how are we going to measure success? So we will have defined success at the highest level around the policy areas. At the top tier, we will have defined success at that middle tier around the action steps, so that all along the way we know how we're going to be able to come back and report success. And that third tier around tactical planning, this is really the time for departments to roll up their sleeves and to be able to say, how is it that they are going to be able to participate in helping the city accomplish these goals? Where does their work align? What are the resources inside of their department, be it from a budgetary standpoint, a staffing standpoint? How will they contribute to helping the city actually advance this work? And again, at this level, we're just adding players to the table. So we've had our policymakers here all along. We've added some community voice in that middle tier. And this is really in that third tier where departments, again, are stepping up and taking some ownership of really being able to align their specific business planning in their department with the strategic vision that's come down from our policymakers. And that bottom tier is the opportunity for us to really think about how we're reporting that progress. We have a lot of already natural ways inside the city to report progress through our Results Minneapolis. Our departments provide updates on a periodic basis. We have our council committees as well, where departments report into. That's another mechanism for progress to be shared. We have our Racial Equity Community Advisory Committee and likely other boards and commissions who also have a responsibility to report back progress. So we will begin to think about not only are we doing the planning and setting the success factors and the performance measures associated with our goals, but all the different ways in which we can continue to provide updates at council and to our community members on progress.
Great. So next we can go through what an example of this would actually look like. So you'll see during the high level visioning, leadership would prioritize and select which of the 97 policy areas we want to focus on in the next 4 years. So in this example, let's say we selected just 2 of those 97 policy areas, and they were housing, access to housing and public safety. At this stage, we'd also select the measures by which we would know we're making progress towards these policy areas. During the mid-tier planning, we'd choose the action steps that align with the policy areas. And so in this example, let's say we selected action step B around housing and action step D around public safety. We would at this point also identify the measures to know we're making progress. And finally, at the tactical level, departments would plan specific goals and activities to address the action steps. So what we'll end up with is a waterfall from the highest level to department work that shows us what work is driving our policy levers. And from the bottom up, we'll be able to see how our work aligns with those action steps and policy levers. So we hope to end up with a paradigm for our work that you'll see at the bottom, which helps us identify which of our work is strategic, as in what helps us accomplish our 4-year priorities that are identified through this process, which of our work is core and work that as a city we will need to do no matter what, and what of our work falls into other, and then how do we start to think about that other bucket of work. So the next step is that we are continuing to share this model out to gather input, and then we are working on the steps needed to start implementing the process. Below is on the page is a draft timeline for when we anticipate these steps will start to take place and some factors that might influence this. Know that there are other things that will influence the timing of this, like orienting appointed boards and commissions to the process, community engagement, etc. So that's all I have. I can stand for questions.
This is a lot. I think there might be a couple questions up here. First is from Councilmember Goodman.
Yeah.
This is a lot for everyone to just think through, and there's only 4 of us here, and there's a lot more people who would be involved. I don't have any strong objection to integrating the 4 major enterprise citywide plans, except for the city's comprehensive plan is not even close to in a position to be adopted. I see it as something completely different than the strategic planning and racial equity plan in that there is broad unanimity and agreement surrounding that, and likely will be with the budget as well. I mean, I haven't seen a lot of drama surrounding the budget for many years. The comp plan has proven to be something that has drawn out very strong emotions from myself as one, but many, many people. And I feel like we're heading towards something that is not going to be universally accepted, and there are going to be huge winners and losers. So how do you possibly suggest that a plan that could potentially be adopted on a very split vote with a lot of controversy in the community could then be a guiding factor in all of our strategic planning? You would think that the strategic planning should be things where there's like almost a super majority of unanimity.
Yeah.
And one more comment about that. And the comp plan isn't going to be done or adopted prior to the time that we start this high-level strategic planning.
Yeah. So, I think what we're hoping to see, happen is at that high-level visioning, really the priorities of the council should come through, and if we can't agree on all 97 policy areas through the process, then I think we'll strive to get to the smaller number and have agreement on what those are through the process. Do you want to jump in?
Sure. Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Goodman, I appreciate that comment. I think a couple of things to consider at this time would be that the comp plan is still out for community comment through July 22nd. That coincides nicely with this process. The comp plan will, of course, be changed to reflect some of that community comment. So I would not predict right now where we will end up in December with that document in terms of its form. It will certainly change between now and that time, given community comment and jurisdictional comment from other communities. So there is a process that we're following right now that does nicely meld with strategic planning and equity planning. The other thing I would note is that this comprehensive plan is the first comprehensive plan in the history of the city to take an equity lens and a climate action lens in terms of informing some of the goals and policies that are stated within the document. So in terms of it dovetailing with some of the strategic planning work and equity planning work, there is a nice opportunity here. It is necessarily a difficult process to go through because it does represent some major changes, but I'd like to believe that we are in a position where we can work through that and we can produce a document that has, if not unanimity, has strong support.
Okay, I don't believe that. I think that's a very Pollyanna way to look at it. There's huge divisions in where people are at and what's been proposed in this comprehensive plan. There are streets in my ward where there are single-family homes that are being proposed to be 4-story buildings. I can't tell people, don't worry, your comments will guide a potential change in this area. People are gearing up to fight it, even though they shouldn't have to fight their city. And so if 13 other people, won't be, if 10 other people on the council say, too bad, your constituents are going to get this shoved down your throat, then we're just going to go with that. And then we're going to plan the entire city strategic plan based on that with all of that division. I don't understand that. The comp plan, for the people who drafted it and have been charged with being bold, haven't thought through where the public is at, which is unlike this larger race and equity conversation we're having surrounding people being brought along in a way that they understand the importance of that overall concept to our community. The comp plan has done nothing towards that. It's been confrontational pretty much since the minute it was announced.
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Goodman. The comp plan is drafted based on the 14 goals that this city council adopted in April 2017 and the 6 value statements that it adopted a year previous to that. So the comp plan underpinnings, the foundation of that document, are based on the values that you as a council adopted. And we have had a very broad and very transparent community engagement process where we've listened very carefully to our residents and business owners and other property owners. So I have to reject an assertion that this has not been a transparent process. And I feel that if you have specific concerns, we should be discussing those.
Well, Madam Chair, Ms. Worthington, I was here for that process. And nowhere in those points did we say put a 4-plex on every block. Nowhere did we say take single family homes and turn them into 4-story buildings. And that seems to be what you're suggesting, is that that was in the 16 points, that people thought through that and said to us, please increase density everywhere in the city, no matter where it is, and let's eliminate lanes of traffic and put in bike lanes everywhere. That's not what we said in the points that we made with regard to the comp plan. And I'm quite sure the leadership on the comp plans, no one told you to do that. That was you being bold, not the public telling us, telling you to be bold. Maybe there were some people who wanted to be bold, but there were plenty of people who want to see more incremental change. And so I don't know how we can take what's in this draft comp plan and say this is going to be our strategic plan, because we don't know how it's going to turn out. You're saying that there's going to be changes. I suppose if we can meet and I can hear that some of my issues are going to be addressed, fine, but I don't hear that right now. And everywhere I go, every grocery store I go into, people are very upset about what potentially could happen to the neighborhood that they love and that they don't like it.
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Goodman, I'm happy to meet with you anytime to discuss your concerns. And I appreciate your comments today. Thank you.
So, Andrea, my point is I don't think the comp plan can be something that can be a governing document at this point, since it hasn't been adopted, it won't have been adopted, and I don't understand how that not adopted plan could be influencing strategic planning in such a comprehensive way, and it certainly can't be held up as equal to our race equity plan, where there's a lot of unanimity surrounding it.
That's really good feedback.
If I may, I appreciate it. Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Goodman. I hear you and I appreciate what you're saying. For our purposes for strategic planning, we were really thinking about, as we think about going into strategic planning, what has happened in the past of gathering us together and thinking about for what are the new goals and what are the new values for a new council term. Our hope was to take the values and the goals that we have already approved in the comprehensive plan broadly, to think about what does that look like and integrating that so we don't have separate plans going out there. To your point, however, I think you're right that as we think about the 97 policies and how those policies are being vetted in community, how those will eventually at some point in some way, shape or form, whether it's 97, whether they're 83, whether they grow or shrink or change in the future. I think those are the policies that we want to make sure that we put priorities to those, because no matter how the comp plan ends up being approved, we cannot, in my humble estimation as a city, take on that volume of priorities and say we're going to be working at all of those at the same time. That's what this strategic process is trying to streamline, not the details of the comp plan, which are yet to be determined. I don't know if that clarifies.
A little bit, Madam Chair. It clarifies it a little bit, but I heard Ms. Worthington say these 16 points that we took to draft the comp plan were the things that said put a fourplex on every corner. So if we took out of the 16 points, put a fourplex on every corner, then that's now going to be translated into our strategic planning as well.
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Goodman, what we were saying in terms of those 16 points were that let those words and that terminology, growth and equity, guide us and take that as part of the goals of our strategic planning process, because we have approved those. How that looks and what those tactics are, whether that means a fourplex or whether that means more bike transits or whether that means more or less police officers in our communities, those tactics right now are not what we need to decide into, because that's something that's going to come before council to decide, A, what they are, and B, what our priority should be in the future. So that's going to land squarely with policymakers as well.
Coordinator Rivera Vandermeide, as I look at the suggested timing and all of the outflows here, it looks to me like we are saying it is a little bit more of a cascade, and those values and those goals that we agreed upon in the past might be influencing things such as some of our equity work, some of our Results Minneapolis work, but it's about those things we previously agreed to, not a comprehensive plan draft at this point in time.
Chair Palmisano, you're correct that right now what we're thinking about are those values and goals. The reality is that we as a city, and I think you'll appreciate this, I know staff appreciates this, we often have a variety of plans. We could do a completely separate racial equity plan. We could do a separate budget process. We often do with strategic planning. What we're trying to do is really align those big plans that impact our work. And the details of that, again, I think that as we think about it, as the comp plan gets approved and the tactics and the strategies for those are put forth before councils, put forth before policymakers, and approved by you, it's those that we're going to ask you, what do we prioritize in that? But the values of equity and the values of sorry, I'm blanking on growth, for example, those are goals that we have set we're going to move forward on. And that's what we want to align, as opposed to having 3 or 4 disparate plans out there. It does not make good use of resources if we're constantly trying to address independent plans that actually have some relation to each other. But again, the tactics underlying a variety of things, whether it's a racial equity action plan or whether it's the comprehensive plan, those strategies and how you achieve those still have to be approved by policymakers at some future date.
Thank you. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. So to make sure that I understand, because I do think it's important that we have, a set of documents that we can commonly agree on. And I think if I understand the process right, this first, the sort of high-level visioning process is one where, as a council, we sort of have an opportunity to decide which documents we're operating from and which values and goals we're putting forward, so that we can really have a pretty heavy hand in setting the top level version of this. And in a way, it strikes me that this actually might be a way of working out and sort of making visible where we do and don't have unanimity, because I think as we set these values and goals, then we're turning to the departments to say, okay, show us how you're going to implement them. CPED, regulatory services, everybody, what's your role in, if we said access to housing is the sort of value that we want to talk about then, and if they came forward and said put a fourplex on every lot, then we would actually have an opportunity then as they're coming back to us to say, well, is that what we want to be measuring or isn't it? So it feels to me like this process, whether we have some discomfort about which documents are included in it, it feels like it builds in a process for us to have an iterative conversation where departments are going to get good feedback from us, and it actually might be a way of calling the question on a few things in the course of this conversation to get us to a point where we find the places of, if not unanimity, then at least a sort of common set of values that we can operate from. So I appreciate the framework of this process. I think there are probably going to be some fascinating conversations that come out of it, from a lot of different places. But I think the resolving some of the tension around which metrics are we measuring and what are we holding you accountable for and how are you contributing to these bigger strategic goals, I think makes a lot of sense. So I appreciate the framework, and I think there's a lot of good work that can be done within this. So I'm generally supportive of the framework. I appreciate what you put forward here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually like the framework also. I think the fact that we didn't have any results measurement for the past 4 years was a failure of the previous administration. So I think having something that's measurable is a good thing. But I do think the coordinator's example of we're in favor of growth, using that as an example, is exactly what the problem is. I too would say I'm in favor of growth. And I am, and I represent downtown, so we've seen our fair share of it. But I'm sorry to pound away at the fourplex thing. It's not my only objection to the comp plan, but it's a good example of, well, if you're opposed to having a fourplex on every block, then all of a sudden you're anti-growth. And so it extrapolates itself from that one controversial point. So I'm afraid to even say I'm in favor of growth now because of what that might mean. And should I object to it, then I am objectified as being against growth. And so that is, and I could probably use that. I could have probably used a different example, although that's the one that's on my mind at this exact moment. And it's been on my mind ever since the comp plan came out, and I was getting multiple calls every day about it. But I don't think, I think we should start from places where we agree and try to avoid places we don't agree, and also try to avoid saying, well, if it's in one of the 16 statements, and you're in favor of growth, you have to then accept whatever outcome there is that are tactics coming from that goal of growth. But I do think that the overall idea of doing it differently is good. The way it's been done in the past, I think, was almost an old strategic planning model taken from 20 years ago. Everyone's going to agree on their goals and their touchy-feely things, and then we're going to move to strategies and objectives, and we're too big of an enterprise to sum it up that way. And I think that the past review process got caught up in just too many priorities, and there was no way to measure them. And so the result was no measurement. And so I do think that the system or structure is probably a good one to move us in that direction. I just object to all of the data points that are going into it when we don't have adopted plans.
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Goodman. I think that's really valuable input that we can be considering. And, the good news about building a new process is that we get to design the process. And so we are thinking about the comp plan as a foundation for this. But I think as we build this, it's very important to this group that it's dynamic and adaptable to meet the needs of our leadership and our organization. And so, Councilmember Fletcher, I think, your comment about starting from the highest level and then working our way down will hopefully help us come to agreement, at that highest level first. The how we do what we do, we can figure out as we build this out.
Thank you. I do also acknowledge it's been fairly disjointed in the past. The challenge here is about coordination and alignment. And I just need to say that in being part of, especially these last 3 months, a lot of the results Minneapolis work and what we're measuring and how that can be objective and how we can do it in a consistent way, I think that's going to get us where we need to go here too. So thanks for all of your work.
Mhm.
Did you have any other slides or information to present?
No, that's it.
Do my colleagues have any other questions or thoughts for Ms. Larson? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
With that, I will move to receive and file this report, the coordinator's update, specifically the overview here of the 2018 strategic planning work being done. I'm going to move that forward. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Our agenda is done for today. Thank you for joining us.